An open letter to Europe. I was born in 1942, the worst year of the war. My birthplace was a village in Devonshire. I was told stories of the bombardment of the Devon ports and of how the fighter aircraft that accompanied the bombers would strafe civilian targets at random. One of the targets was the cottage hospital in which I had been born a day previously. My mother and the other women, each with her newborn child, took shelter under their beds. My early memories were in part of war, accounts of war, and evidence of war. I was told of my mother's father under gas attack in the Great War. He survived but died young as a result. My father was badly wounded during World War II and never quite recovered from his injuries. It was some time before I came to realize that his wartime day-to-day job was to kill and run the risk of being killed, that his most prevalent emotion would have been fear. Each day, for the duration of his war, fear. Each day, the spin of some celestial coin. As I grew up, I was half aware of the long list of wars that more or less seamlessly followed World War II. Like many of my generation, I took to the streets to demonstrate against the Vietnam War. Now as then, I have in mind Robert Lowell's lines from Waking Early Sunday Morning. Peace to our children when they fall in small war on the heels of small war. My work, while not taking war as its primary subject, has often carried the shadow of war. In 205, I published Legion. The title sequence in that book consisted of voices from various war zones. The sequence grew and developed, I think, from rhythms and images in the English versions I made of poems written by Goran Simic when he and his family were under siege in Sarajevo. After having read Legion, Seamus Heaney asked me, "Where did you find all those voices?" He was referring to the variousness of the poems, that some drew their narratives and images from the Great War, some from World War II, some certainly from the Balkan War, while others were accounts of war's en passant brutalities, particular stories given by particular voices. I recently published my English versions of the poems written by Yanis Ritsos while he was in prison camps and under house arrest at the time of the military junta in Greece during the 60s and early 70s. It occurs to me that in all things it's difficult to avoid the notion of conflict. It occurs to me that to feel that way might be an inescapable human tendency. That war and the shadow of war seems to track my work is no surprise to me. Poetry is how I interpret the world. However, the four long poems that form, as it were, the spine of my collection, Fire Songs, give different but related accounts of a war more terrifying and more destructive than armed conflict. The first fire song concerns Anne Askew, a Protestant martyr burned at the stake for heresy. Anne's voice, in my version of her martyrdom, is prophetic. In a dream encounter with Anne, the poem's narrator is close by as the flames engulf her, and he says, "The only thing she can get to me through the furnace as I lean into her is yes, it will be fire. It will be fire. It will be fire. Anne Askew's prophecy speaks of a war in which we are all combatants, where there is no front line and from which there appears to be no retreat. It is the war on nature. That war has been in progress for a very long time. On August the 14th, 1912, a newspaper in New Zealand printed an article warning of the effect on Earth's climate of burning coal. This warning was ignored. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, was published some 50 years later. It concerned the reckless use of pesticides and the effect on bird life. The title speaks for itself. Again, ignored. 20 years or so after that, I attended a series of conferences that focused on the tipping points that would bring us to a circumstance when global warming had become critical. They too were ignored. And now that time has been reached. The natural world, life on planet Earth, still under attack, is dangerously close to unsustainable. We couldn't have come to this crisis in nature and still be ignoring it had we not lost touch with nature, with the creatures of the earth, with the earth itself. James Lovelock proposed the Gaia hypothesis, that the planet we inhabit and the creatures with which we share it form an interdependent system, harmonious and benign. Humankind's apparent refusal to allow this harmony or be part of it seems to come from the notion that it must serve our needs, that it can be exploited as and when we choose. We do not, as we should, stand in awe of the subtle mysteries of the natural world. I am drawn to the images of birds in flight. I am particularly drawn to raptors. I wrote a poem, Boland Beth, about a hen harrier, a protected species, illegally shot on a grouse moor. The high-end business of killing driven grouse for pleasure won't tolerate natural predators. More evidence of damage in our relationship with nature. I am drawn to the hare, to the myth and legend of the hare as shapeshifter, as which is familiar, to its cultural history, to the living creature as the embodiment of those mysteries. I wrote a poem sequence, Lepus, that identified the hare as a trickster figure, who in a poem titled The Hare as Bad Omen, predicts a bleak future if evidence of environmental breakdown continues to be ignored. The hare speaks of these things which no matter your bells and candles, no matter your half measures, your few steps back, will come, will come, will come. It's only now that I see that that last line, written 12 years earlier, carries the same rhythmic impulse as Anne Askew's prophecy. The persecution of hen harriers has put that bird among our most endangered species. Habitat destruction has caused the brown hare population to be seriously diminished, and the illegal coursing of hares with hounds still goes on. The threat to these particular creatures is, to me, particularly emblematic. But the list of creatures on the brink of extinction is long. Species decline irrevocably damages the ecosystem. This includes insects. If the pollinators die, we die. These threats are man-made. We have put ourselves among those species at risk. Our attack on nature sometimes seems akin to a death wish. Several decades ago, fossil fuel companies made their own assessments of the environmental effect of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Their scientists concluded that burning fossil fuels will cause dramatic environmental effects, and added that the potential problem is great and urgent. Their opinions were suppressed by the companies they represented. Earth scientists have for years been clear about what would happen if the war on nature continued. We are said to be halfway through the sixth great extinction. It's undeniable that this is caused entirely by human activity. Little or nothing is being done to check or prevent its advance. Why? Is the apparent indifference to Holocene extinction actually humankind accepting that it's too late? That the way the world works can't now be modified, even though we do know how that might be done, or at least begin to be done. That people will continue to lead lives the patterns of which are set and unalterable. That as the last creatures, fish, insects vanish from the earth, we will continue to watch TV, cheer our football team, board aeroplanes, listen to music, go shopping, celebrate the birth of our children. Will production plants continue to the last scintilla of energy to make cars, refrigerators, air conditioning units? Will loggers move to the last stand of trees in the rainforest? Will factory farms still fatten their stock and slaughterhouses still slaughter? In writing a letter to Europe, and I consider myself European, despite the mendacious, brutal self-interest that spoke to xenophobic and racist tendencies in my country and provoked Brexit, I think particularly of European governance. It might be, as is sometimes convincingly said, that the world is run by evil men. That greed and power go hand in hand. That capitalism exploits natural resources, reshapes them, and sells them back to us as product. That recent human history shows evidence of reckless science followed rapidly by reckless technology. But just as there is the science, the technology, and crucially the money to slow and stop what can only be described as the heat death of the planet, there must be among those people who have governmental power and influence some who can plainly see the cliff edge on which we stand. My plea, or rather that of the unborn, is to the world, but this letter is to Europe. Anne Askew's prophecy was, like all prophecies, a vision, a dark vision, as are visions of my own when I reflect on reports from the environmental front. One vision, which each day I try to unsee, is of a planet devoid of all life, where a screen powered with nothing but a vast residue of greed continues to register the limitless increase in the collective wealth of the disappeared world's one-time elites. Our only legacy as money makes money make money. Only those who govern can cause these visions to fade. This is a letter to Europe, but in particular to those who govern Europe. There must be significant change, and very soon. Someone has to take the lead. Someone who has the way and the will. I have no advice, nothing to add to what I've written here, except perhaps watch your children as they sleep. Watch your grandchildren as they sleep.